On my 18th birthday, my family gave me two things: a grocery store chocolate cake and a one-way bus ticket out of their lives forever. They said after 5 years of me nursing my sick mother back to health, they needed their lives back. And for 10 silent years, I gave them what they wanted. But this morning, a panicked voicemail proved the real reason my family kicked me out was never about their freedom. It was about their guilt. It was about a secret they buried that was far more sinister than I ever imagined. This is not just a story about how a loving family could do the unthinkable. It's a story about the lies we're told and the truth we have to fight for. Before we uncover the poison that ran through my home, if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, hit that subscribe button, because this is the one place where our stories are finally heard. Now, to understand why my mother is begging for my help today, you need to understand why I was truly kicked out. It all started with the lie they told me about a locked shed in our backyard. Our house, from the outside, was a picture-perfect postcard. A 2-story home with a manicured lawn and a porch swing that swayed in the salty breeze. But inside, the air was thick with things left unsaid. My life revolved around my mother, Eleanor. She was my world, and I was her caregiver, her nurse, her confidant. Her illness was a phantom that haunted our halls, a collection of strange symptoms that doctors could never quite name. And my father, Richard, used it as his shield. He was always working, always stressed, always disappearing for hours into that shed behind our house. The shed was the one place I was never allowed to go. It was his private kingdom, a place that always had a faint, sharp chemical smell clinging to the air around it. Sometimes, he'd emerge late at night, his clothes stained with something dark, his mood even darker. He'd brush past me, his eyes filled with a terrifying mix of anger and fear, and lock the door behind him. My mother would just smile weakly from her bed and say, "Your father is working so hard for us, Grace." But it felt like more than work. It felt like a frantic effort to keep something contained. I was a teenager trying to navigate high school, but my real education was in pill schedules, physical therapy routines, and learning to read the subtle shifts in my mother's breathing. It was a strange kind of love she gave me, a desperate, clinging affection that felt like it would hold on forever right up until the moment they kicked me out. I knew, even back then, that what was happening in that house was more than just a family dealing with sickness. It was a secret my family was willing to destroy me to protect, and I was living right in the middle of it, completely oblivious to how deep the poison really ran. The secret of the shed was a low hum beneath the surface of my life, a constant, quiet vibration of wrongness. But my days weren't filled with mystery. They were filled with a routine so suffocatingly predictable that my own reflection in the mirror started to look like a stranger. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of my mother's bedroom. The scent of lavender and vanilla from my high school lotions had been replaced by the sterile, sharp smell of rubbing alcohol and the faint, sweet odor of decay that clings to chronic illness. I was 15, then 16, and the years blurred into a single, long hallway of service. My days started before the sun rose, not with an alarm for school, but with the soft clinking of pill bottles. I'd line them up on the kitchen counter like little soldiers, sorting them into the plastic AM and PM containers. Morning was for medication, a breakfast she usually wouldn't finish, and helping her bathe. The water would run, and I'd stare out the steamy bathroom window at the other houses, watching kids with backpacks and skateboards leaving for a life that felt like it was on another planet. My father, Richard, would already be gone. He'd leave a pre-signed check on the counter for groceries or medical supplies, his one tangible contribution to the household mechanics. His mantra, the one he'd repeat any time I looked too tired or too sad, was always the same. He'd pat my shoulder, his touch brief and impersonal, and say, "We are a family. Grace, we handle this together." But we was just me. Together was the loneliest word I'd ever heard. My mother, Eleanor, wasn't cruel. In fact, she was the opposite, and that made it so much harder. Her love was a velvet cage. She'd hold my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail, and her eyes would fill with tears. "I don't know what I'd do without you, sweetie," she'd whisper, her voice a fragile melody. "No one understands what I need like you do." Each word was a golden bar locking me in further. She'd praise my patience, my gentle touch, my maturity. She told me I was an old soul, that I was special. What I was a prisoner, and my warden loved me. Friends stopped calling. What was the point? I could never go to the movies, never hang out at the mall, never join them for a bonfire on the beach. I'd see their lives splashed across Instagram, a blur of sun, smiles, and stupid, beautiful, normal teenage moments while I was propped up in a chair by my mother's bed, reading to her from a book I didn't care about. The hum of her oxygen machine, the only soundtrack to my youth. The resentment was a bitter pill I had to swallow every single day, and I choked it down with a forced smile because how can you be angry at someone who is dying? My father remained a ghost who smelled of secrets. The shed was his true home. I'd see him from my window, hauling heavy-looking plastic barrels inside, his face grim and set. The chemical smell, a sharp, metallic tang, would hang in the humid Florida air for hours after he'd locked the door. One evening, he came inside for dinner, and the smell was stronger than ever, clinging to his work shirt. I remember wrinkling my nose. "Dad, what is that smell? It's so strong." His reaction was terrifying. He didn't yell. He went perfectly still, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He lowered it slowly, deliberately, and his eyes, a flat, dead gray, locked onto mine. "Don't ask questions you don't need the answers to. Grace," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You focus on your mother. I'll focus on providing for this family." The message was clear. My world was inside these walls. His was out there, and the two were never to meet. The fear I felt in that moment wasn't just about his anger. It was the chilling realization that he was hiding something, and he believed that providing money absolved him of everything else. The breaking point came the night of the junior prom. I had a dress. It had been hanging in my closet for a month. A shimmering blue thing my friend Chloe had helped me pick out online. It was a beacon of hope, a promise of one normal night. I'd arranged for a home care nurse to stay with my mom for a few hours. My dad had even agreed to pay for it, a rare concession. But an hour before my date was supposed to arrive, my mom had a bad spell. She started shaking. Her breathing became ragged, and she grew terrified. She clung to my arm, sobbing my name, begging me not to leave her. The home care nurse was competent, but my mother only wanted me. "Please, Grace," she cried, her face pale with sweat. "Don't go. I need you. Please." I looked from her desperate face to the blue dress hanging on my closet door. I saw my entire life summed up in that one impossible choice. So I stayed. I took off my makeup, put on my pajamas, and held my mother's hand until she fell into a fitful sleep. I listened to my phone buzz with texts from my friends, saw the pictures of them laughing and dancing, and something inside me finally snapped. That night, after she was asleep and the house was silent, I packed a duffel bag with a few changes of clothes, the $100 I had saved, and my yearbook. My heart hammered against my ribs with a frantic, terrified rhythm. This was it. I was leaving. I didn't know where I would go, but anywhere was better than this slow, quiet death. I crept down the hallway, my hand on the front doorknob, the cold metal a shock to my system. I could taste freedom. And then I heard it. A heavy thud from my mother's room, followed by a sharp, strangled gasp. I froze. Silence, then a weak, almost inaudible whimper. Grace, I stood there for a full minute, torn in two. The open road of my future pulled at me, but the years of conditioning, the ingrained sense of duty, the love that felt like a chain it pulled harder. I let go of the doorknob. The hope drained out of me, leaving a hollow, aching void. I walked back to my room, unpacked the bag, and placed the dress back in the closet. As I slid the closet door shut, I knew I hadn't just put away a piece of clothing. I had buried what was left of my own life. After the prom night, that wasn't a part of me, just gave up. The fight went out of me, replaced by a dull, gray resignation. I was a ghost in my own life, drifting through the hallways of my high school, the words of my teachers turning into a meaningless buzz in my ears. At home, I was the perfect caregiver, a silent, efficient machine of medication schedules and temperature checks. The hope I'd packed into that duffel bag had been unpacked and put away for good. I had accepted my fate. My life would be the four walls of my mother's room, until the day it wasn't. This quiet despair became my new normal, and I thought it would last forever. But hope, I learned, is a stubborn weed. It can grow in the darkest of places. It came in the form of a flyer on a school bulletin board, printed on bright yellow paper that hurt to look at. The All Florida Scholars Program. It wasn't just a scholarship, it was a 4-year, all-expenses-paid ticket to any state university. It was an escape pod. I took the flyer and hid it in my textbook, my heart giving a painful little flutter for the first time in months. Later that week, my English teacher, Mr. Harrison, a kind man with tired eyes, asked me to stay after class. He slid my latest essay across his desk towards me. It had a big red A on it. "Grace," he said, his voice gentle. "This is brilliant. Your analysis is university level. You can't let a mind like this go to waste. You're applying for the All Florida, aren't you?" I just stared at him, my throat tight. I hadn't told a soul. He just saw it in me. That night, for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark. After my mother was asleep, I'd stay up, the only light in the house coming from my desk lamp, and I'd work on my application. The essays became my secret world, a place where I could talk about my dreams, my ideas, my future, a future that existed somewhere beyond the scent of sickness and the hum of medical equipment. It was my last act of rebellion, whispered onto paper in the dead of night. As the application deadline neared, the tension in the house grew thicker. My father was more agitated than ever, spending more and more time in his shed, often not coming in until well after midnight. He started taking his phone calls outside on the back patio, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen washing my mom's lunch dishes, and the patio door was cracked open just enough for me to hear his voice, a low, angry growl. "I don't care what the disposal cost is," he hissed into the phone. "Just get rid of the entire batch. I want it gone by Friday." There was a pause. I held my breath, my hands frozen in the soapy water. A faulty seal. "That's not my problem. That's your problem. You fix it." Another pause. Then his voice dropped even lower, laced with venom. "Listen to me. No one can trace it back here. The property is clean. You make sure it stays that way." I felt a chill snake down my spine. Batch of what? Trace it back. It sounded like something out of a movie, not something a man who sold specialty machine parts would say. He hung up, and a moment later he walked into the kitchen. He saw me standing there and his face hardened. What he snapped? I shook my head, turning back to the sink. "Nothing," I whispered. The word was barely out of my mouth when a terrible sound echoed from the bedroom down the hall. It was a cough, but it was a sound I'd never heard before, a wet, tearing noise, like something was being ripped apart inside my mother's lungs. It was followed by a desperate, gurgling gasp for air. I ran. I found her sitting up in bed, her face a terrifying shade of blue, her hands clawing at her own throat. Her eyes were wide with a primal terror I will never forget. I screamed for my dad as I grabbed the emergency oxygen mask we kept by her bed, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit it over her face. The numbers on the pulse oximeter were plummeting. This was it. This was the big one we'd always been told might happen. As I was trying to hold the mask in place, my mind was a chaotic storm of images, the plunging numbers, my mother's blue lips, my father's angry voice on the phone, the word disposal. The pieces didn't fit, but they were all there, swirling in a horrifying vortex of panic. My dad was on the phone with 911, his voice tight with fear. "The ambulance is 20 minutes out. A damn traffic pile up on the interstate," he yelled. 20 minutes. She didn't have 20 minutes. Then, a memory surfaced through my panic. My dad, months ago, after a smaller scare, mentioning he'd bought a new, high-capacity oxygen tank as a backup. "It's in the shed," he'd said. "For a real emergency." This was a real emergency. The tank I screamed at him, the one in the shed. He looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't just fear for his wife. It was a different kind of fear. A cornered, frantic terror. "Stay away from there! Grace!" he shouted back, his focus still on the 911 operator. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I ran out the back door and sprinted across the lawn. The shed door was secured with a heavy, rusted padlock. It looked ancient, immovable. "The key," I screamed over my shoulder. "Where's the key? It's not here. Just wait for the paramedics," he yelled. But I could hear my mother's gasps from the house. I wasn't waiting. I saw a heavy garden spade leaning against the house. I grabbed it, the wooden handle rough against my skin, and I started swinging it against the lock with all the strength I had. The metal shrieked in protest with each impact. I was a wild animal, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate need to save her. I was breaking down the door to his secret kingdom. He must have seen me from the window. I heard the back door slam open, heard his feet pounding on the grass behind me. He wasn't yelling my name. He was roaring. He reached me just as I managed to break the rusted metal hasp. He grabbed me by the shoulder and threw me to the ground. I landed hard. The air knocked out of me. I looked up, stunned, my cheek scraping against the dirt. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the now broken lock, his face a mask of pure horror. Then his eyes snapped down to me, and the fury in them was unlike anything I had ever seen. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, and his voice was a low, terrifying whisper. "Don't you ever," he seethed, jabbing a finger in my face, "ever come near this door again." Just then, the distant wail of a siren cut through the air. The sound broke his trance. He stood up, frantically trying to compose himself, running a hand through his hair to look like a worried husband and not the monster he had just revealed himself to be. The paramedics were coming. Help was coming. But as I lay there on the ground, the stinging pain on my cheek was nothing compared to the cold, horrifying certainty that settled in my soul. The secret inside that shed, whatever it was more important to him than my mother's life. And it was definitely more important than mine. After the incident at the shed, the silence in our house became a living thing. It was heavy and suffocating, filling the spaces where normal family conversations should have been. My father and I moved around each other like hostile planets in a decaying orbit, never speaking, never making eye contact. He didn't apologize for throwing me to the ground. He didn't explain. He just watched me with cold, calculating eyes, as if trying to gauge whether or not I was a threat. My mother miraculously recovered from her crisis, chose the path of willful ignorance. She acted as if nothing had happened, chattering about the weather and what was on TV, her cheerfulness so forced it was grotesque. I felt like I was losing my mind. Was I the only one who remembered his hands on me, his voice full of venom? Their silence was a form of gaslighting, a coordinated effort to erase a truth that was now seared into my memory. My one escape, my only secret, was the All Florida Scholars application. I finished it in the dead of night, hunched over my desk, my handwriting tight with a mixture of hope and fear. I mailed it from a postbox 2 towns over, a clandestine act of defiance. It was a lottery ticket, a 1 in a million chance, but it was all I had. The weeks crept by, each day a perfect copy of the last, a monotonous cycle of caregiving and avoidance. I had resigned myself to this purgatory, believing this was all my life would ever be. Then, everything changed. The phone rang one Tuesday afternoon. It was my mother's specialist. I listened on the extension phone in the kitchen, my heart pounding. An experimental treatment she'd been on, one we'd all but given up on, had worked. Not just worked, it was a miracle. The doctor used the word remission. He said her inflammation markers had plummeted to near normal levels. For the first time in 5 years, the monster that had been eating my family from the inside out was gone. For the first time in a long time, the silence in our house was broken by a sound I barely recognized: joy. My mother wept with relief. My father, in a shocking display of emotion, actually hugged her, burying his face in her shoulder. He even looked at me, a genuine smile cracking his stern face. "We're through the worst of it, Gracie," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to be a real family again." And for a brief, stupid moment, I believed him. The next week was my 18th birthday. I expected it to pass like any other day, unmarked and ignored. But when I came home from school, there was a small, slightly lopsided chocolate cake from the grocery store on the kitchen table. 18 candles were stuck in the top. My parents were both there, smiling. It was awkward and clumsy, this performance of a normal family. But it was more than I'd had in years. "Make a wish." "Sweetie," my mother urged, her voice sounding stronger than it had since I was a child. I closed my eyes. Let this be real. I wished, a desperate, fragile prayer. Please, just let this be real. I blew out the candles in one breath, and as they applauded, a warmth spread through my chest. Maybe we had made it. Maybe the end of her sickness meant the beginning of our healing. After we'd eaten the cake, my father cleared his throat. "We have a birthday present for you, Grace," he said. He slid a plain white envelope across the table. His smile was gone, replaced by a cool, businesslike expression. My mother suddenly found the pattern on her plate fascinating. The warmth in my chest turned to ice. This wasn't a birthday card. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, there was a stack of $20 bills and a one-way Greyhound bus ticket to Orlando, dated for the next morning. I stared at it, the words blurring, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. "You're an adult now, Grace," my mother said softly. Still not looking at me, her voice was calm, gentle even, but it was the most brutal sound I had ever heard. "And frankly, your father and we need to get our lives back." I looked at my father, begging him with my eyes to say this was a joke, a terrible, cruel mistake. But his face was a stone mask. "Your presence here," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "It's a reminder of all the sickness, all the bad times. Your mother is healthy now. We need a fresh start, without all of that weighing us down. You understand, don't you? It's time for you to start your own life." I finally understood. The cake, the smiles, the wish. It was all a lie. A carefully constructed stage play designed to soften the blow of the execution. The cruelty wasn't just in kicking me out. It was in giving me that one perfect moment of hope before they shattered my world completely. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I was too broken for that. I felt nothing at all. Just a vast, echoing emptiness where my heart used to be. I stood up from the table, the bus ticket clutched in my hand, and walked to my room in a silent daze. I packed the same duffel bag I'd packed for my failed escape. It felt lighter this time. I walked down the stairs and to the front door. Neither of them said a word. Neither of them looked at me. As I reached for the doorknob, I could hear them behind me in the kitchen, their voices low. They were talking about what color to paint my room. The click of the door closing behind me was the last sound I ever heard in the house I grew up in. I was 18. I was homeless. And I was utterly, completely alone. The Greyhound bus was a purgatory on wheels, a humming, vibrating capsule of stale air and strangers' quiet miseries. I'd found a seat by a grimy window, and for 10 hours, I just watched Florida blur past, a monotonous smear of palm trees and swampy canals. I was in a state of shock so profound it felt like a dream. My mind kept replaying the scene in the kitchen, a continuous, silent film. The sickly, sweet taste of the chocolate cake, the sound of my mother's voice, so soft and reasonable, as she explained why my entire existence was now an inconvenience. The weight of the envelope in my hand, it didn't feel real. None of it felt real. It felt like I had died, and my ghost was now trapped on this bus, heading nowhere. I wasn't just a daughter who'd been kicked out. I had been erased. My 18 years of service, of sacrifice, of life, had been deemed a bad memory they wanted to paint over. The Orlando bus station was a sensory assault. The cacophony of announcements, crying babies, and hurried footsteps was a world away from the oppressive quiet I was used to. For a moment, the sheer anonymity was a relief. Here, I wasn't a caregiver. I wasn't a disappointment. I was nothing. But that relief quickly curdled into a raw, gnawing terror. The $2,000 my father had given me felt like poison in my pocket, but it was the only thing keeping me from sleeping on the street. I found a cheap motel off the highway, a sad, peeling place where the towels were threadbare and the lock on the door felt flimsy. I spent the first 2 days in that room, just lying on the lumpy bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. For years, my every waking moment had been dictated by someone else's needs. Get the medication, check the temperature, fluff the pillows, help her to the bathroom. Now, there was nothing, no purpose. The silence I had once craved was now a roaring void, threatening to swallow me whole. The money vanished. It bled away on the motel room, on takeout food I barely tasted, on a new set of clothes because I couldn't stand to wear anything that held the scent of my old home. In less than 2 weeks, I was down to my last $50. The motel was no longer an option. The reality of my situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. I checked out, my single duffel bag feeling impossibly heavy, and I just walked. I walked until my feet ached, until the city lights started to blur through a haze of exhaustion. I ended up in a small, quiet park as dusk began to settle, the sky turning a bruised purple. I found an empty bench and collapsed onto it. This was it. I was 18 years old, a high school senior with a 4.0 GPA, and I was homeless. The tears finally came, not hot and angry, but cold and silent. They streamed down my face as I watched families pushing strollers and couples walking their dogs. I was invisible to them, just another piece of the urban landscape to be ignored. I had hit rock bottom. The park bench was across from a large, clean-looking building called Lakeview Senior Living. I watched the nurses in their colorful scrubs moving behind the brightly lit windows. And then, I saw it. An elderly nurse, small and wiry, was trying to help a resident in a wheelchair get up a small curb. The man's foot slipped, the chair tipped, and he tumbled out onto the grass. It wasn't a dramatic fall, but he was frail, and the nurse was clearly struggling. People walked by. A jogger glanced over and kept going. No one stopped, but my body moved before my brain did. The years of instinct, of training, of pure, ingrained duty took over. I dropped my bag, ran across the street, and knelt by the man's side. Is he conscious? Did he hit his head? I asked, my voice clear and steady. The nurse, startled, nodded. I think he's okay, just shaken up. I checked his breathing, then spoke to her with a confidence that felt alien to the broken girl I had been just moments before. Okay, on the count of 3. I'll lift from under his arms. You support his legs and pivot him. We need to avoid twisting his hips. We got him back into his chair safely. The nurse looked at me, her sharp blue eyes taking in my worn-out clothes and the exhaustion on my face. You've done this before, she said. It wasn't a question. My name is Evelyn, she added, extending a wrinkled hand. After we got the resident settled inside, Evelyn bought me a cup of coffee in the small diner next door. She didn't ask a lot of questions, she just listened. And with nothing left to lose, I told her everything. The condensed, painful version, the sickness, the caregiving, the shed, the birthday. When I got to the part about my mother's illness, describing the mysterious respiratory issues, the debilitating fatigue, the joint pain that migrated around her body, Evelyn's face changed. She put her coffee cup down slowly, a look of intense, painful recognition in her eyes. "Child," she said, her voice raspy. "Those symptoms, they sound so familiar. I was a hospice nurse for years, cared for a few men from an old chemical plant that got shut down out on the coast. They presented just like that." She looked at me, her gaze piercing. "They died. A cold dread, colder than anything I'd felt on that park bench, crept through me. A chemical plant. The smell on my father's clothes, the barrels, the sealed-off shed. It wasn't just a secret he was hiding. It was a poison." Evelyn seemed to see the storm of questions in my eyes. She reached across the table and patted my hand. "You have a gift for this work." "Grace," she said, her voice firm, "I have a job opening for a caregiver's assistant. It's not much, but it's a start. But you also have a question that needs an answer." She slid her copy of the newspaper across the table and pointed to the classifieds. Then she reached into her large purse and pulled out a thick, heavy, dog-eared textbook. She pushed it towards me. "Knowledge is power, child," she said. "Don't ever let anyone take that from you." I looked down. The title on the spine was printed in bold letters, An Introduction to Environmental Toxicology. In that greasy spoon diner, surrounded by the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. I felt it. It wasn't just a job offer. It wasn't just a book. It was a weapon. It was the first clue. And it was the beginning of my real life. The job at Lakeview was a baptism by fire. My life became a blur of long, grueling shifts that left my feet aching and my soul weary. It was a world of bedpans and soft foods, of the quiet dignity and the loud, lonely ramblings of people in the final chapters of their lives. The work was hard, but for the first time in my life, I was earning my own money. My first paycheck, a little over $200 after taxes, felt more valuable than the $2,000 my father had used to discard me. I lived in a tiny, rented room with a lumpy mattress and a window that overlooked a brick wall. But it was mine. The silence in that room wasn't the oppressive, watchful silence of my parents' house. It was the quiet of solitude, a space where I could finally breathe. And in that space, I studied. Ms. Evelyn's toxicology textbook became my Bible. After my shifts, I'd sit under the dim light of my single lamp, a cup of cheap instant coffee by my side, and I'd read until the words swam before my eyes. I devoured books from the public library on environmental science and public health. Every page was a revelation. I learned about chemical clusters, about how industrial waste could seep into the ground and water, causing strange, localized outbreaks of rare diseases. Ms. Evelyn became my teacher, my mentor, my entire support system. She'd listen as I connected the dots out loud, my voice shaking with excitement and horror. The respiratory issues, Evelyn. They match the symptoms of organophosphate exposure, and the migrating joint pain is a classic sign of solvent poisoning. She would just nod, her eyes sharp. "Keep going, child," she'd say. "The answers are there if you're brave enough to look." My pain began to transform into purpose. I realized that my years as a caregiver hadn't been a waste. They were an education no school could provide. I knew the intimate landscape of chronic illness. I knew the frustration of having symptoms no doctor could name. I enrolled in the nursing program at the local community college, driven by a new, fierce ambition. I wasn't just doing this for myself anymore. I was doing it for the ghost of the sick woman my mother had been, and for all the other people out there suffering from illnesses that didn't fit neatly into a textbook. I excelled in my classes. While other students struggled with bedside manner, I had a decade of experience, I could calm an agitated dementia patient or spot the subtle signs of dehydration from across a room. I graduated at the top of my class, summa cum laude. Miss Evelyn was in the front row at the ceremony, crying like she was my own mother. She was the only family I needed. After graduation, I started small. I founded Compassion Care from my tiny apartment, a consulting service to help families navigate the labyrinth of the healthcare system. I helped them find specialists, translate medical jargon, and advocate for better care. It was a struggle, but I was building something real. I was helping people. And just as I was starting to feel the first stirrings of stability, of pride, the past reached out its long, venomous fingers to pull me back down. The call came from a distant aunt, a woman I hadn't heard from since I was a child. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with fake concern. "Grace. Dear," she cooed. "I was just talking to your mother, and I heard the most awful thing. She's so worried about you. She said you had some sort of breakdown after you left home, that you've been telling people these fantastic stories about her being poisoned, just to get attention." I felt the blood drain from my face. I could barely form a word. "What she and your father are just heartbroken." My aunt continued, twisting the knife. "They think you're unwell. We all do. The attack was surgical. A week later, a new client who had been enthusiastic about my services suddenly canceled, vaguely mentioning she'd heard some concerning things. It hit me then this wasn't just family gossip. This was a calculated campaign of sabotage. My parents were trying to destroy my credibility, to paint me as a delusional, unstable girl before I could ever get close to the truth. They were trying to silence me, to erase me all over again. The blow was staggering. All the old feelings of worthlessness, of being the crazy one, came rushing back. For a terrifying 48 hours, I let the darkness win. I stayed in my room, the blinds drawn, and I almost gave up. I called Ms. Evelyn, my voice cracking, and told her maybe they were right. Maybe I was just broken. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Ms." Evelyn's voice, hard as steel, cut through my self-pity. "So you're going to let them win," she said. "You're going to let those cowards, who poisoned their own lives and threw their child away, define who you are. Get up. Grace." I was taken aback by her ferocity. "They're not doing this because you're crazy, child," she said, her voice softening slightly. "They're doing this because they're terrified you're right." Her words were like a splash of ice water to the face. She was right. Their panic wasn't a sign of my weakness. It was proof of their guilt. Their desperate attempt to discredit me had the opposite effect it was intended to have. It lit a fire in me. The fear I felt turned into a cold, hard rage. That night, I sat at my desk. The old toxicology book open in front of me. I pulled out a map of my old hometown that I had ordered online. Their fear was now my compass, and it was pointing directly at a small, unassuming property with a single, locked shed. They thought a few lies could stop me. They had no idea they had just declared war. The 10-year drive back to my hometown was surreal. The world I had escaped was exactly as I had left it, yet completely different. The same sun-bleached strip malls, the same humid, heavy air, but I was seeing them through new eyes. I wasn't the broken, terrified girl on the bus anymore. I was a woman returning to the scene of a crime, and I was finally ready to hear the confession. The house looked smaller, neglected. The once manicured lawn was a tangle of weeds, and the paint on the porch was peeling. The picturesque lie had finally started to decay. I walked in without knocking. The smell hit me first, that familiar, cloying scent of sickness, layered over a decade of dust and despair. My father was in a hospital bed in the middle of the living room, a thin, gray man lost in a sea of pillows and blankets. The intimidating monster from my memories was gone, replaced by a frail old man tethered to a noisy oxygen machine. My mother, Eleanor, looked like a ghost. The years had carved deep lines into her face. When she saw me, she didn't hug me. She rushed over and grabbed my arm, her grip like a claw. Her eyes were wild with a terror that went beyond her husband's illness. "Grace, thank God," she whispered, her voice a frantic hiss. "He's worse. The doctors don't know what to do." She started to cry, the same manipulative tears I remembered so well. But that's not it. That's not why I called. She pulled me toward the kitchen, away from the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen tank. "They're asking questions." "Grace," she said, her voice dropping lower. "A reporter from the local paper. He's investigating a cancer cluster in the neighborhood. We need you to tell him that our illnesses are genetic. A tragic family coincidence? It's our only hope. You have to tell them it's just our family's bad luck. Please, Grace, you're our daughter. You have to help us." I looked from my mother's pleading face to the pathetic figure of my father in the other room, and in that moment, all the fear, all the pain, all the years of feeling worthless, it all burned away. It was replaced by a clarity so pure and so cold it felt like a revelation. For 10 years, I thought they had thrown me away because I was a burden. But it was so much worse. They threw me away because I was a witness. I gently pulled my hands from my mother's grasp. "You're right," I said, my voice quiet, but steady and clear. "I am a healthcare expert. And I know that what happened in this neighborhood wasn't bad luck. It was a crime." I pulled out my phone. My mother stared at me, her eyes widening in confusion and horror. "What are you doing?" "You said I was your only hope," I replied, my fingers moving across the screen. "You were right, but not in the way you think." I showed her my screen. It was a bank transfer confirmation. A large sum of money. "I am setting up a fund," I explained, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "With my own money. It's not for your legal defense. It's to provide free, independent medical testing and legal aid for every family on this street that got sick. And I'm giving this fund, along with an anonymous tip about a certain locked shed, to that reporter you're so afraid of." The color drained from her face. She finally understood. I wasn't there to help her bury the truth. I was there to excavate it. I turned and walked out of that house for the last time. As I stepped out into the bright Florida sunshine, I didn't feel anger or even sadness. I felt light. I had spent half my life trapped by their secret, and now I had set the truth free, and in doing so, I had finally, truly, set myself free. I learned that day that family isn't about the blood you share or the secrets you're forced to keep. True family, the kind that matters, doesn't ask you to sacrifice your soul for their comfort. They help you carry your burdens so you can build a life of your own. My story had an ending. But for so many of you watching, your story is still being written. If you are fighting your own battles, trying to break your own toxic cycles, I want you to know that this is your space. Hit that subscribe button, not just to hear another story, but to join a community of people who are choosing to be the heroes of their own lives. We don't run from the truth here. We build our futures on it. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you a spark of hope or a feeling of strength, please share it with someone who needs to hear that it is always okay to unlock the door and walk away into the light. Thank you for listening.